Chris, thank you for joining me today. I got to tell you, my students and I thoroughly enjoyed your production of what I've come to affectionately call Romeo and Juliet.
Thank you.
I had them write essays, basically critiques, reviews, and they all said they greatly enjoyed it. Now, whether or not they were saying that to appease me
Sure.
or not, I don't know. But I think that what you've done with the production is just marvelous. And I'm wondering, where did the idea begin? How did you come up with the idea of adapting Shakespeare and specifically Romeo and Juliet for Zoom?
Yeah, so it's actually I've been adapting it for a while. About 3 or 4 years ago, I discovered that if you do less Shakespeare, you can do more of it. You can do more with it, with the students. So for the past like 3 or 4 years, I've been adapting the like full length shows into like 30-minute bite-sized plays for, I think, both the college students and for the audiences. I mean,
that's quite an undertaking, cramming like 2.5, 3 hours into, in this case, 30 minutes.
Yes, you do lose a lot. At the first time, I was like, oh no, that's a great scene. Oh no, that's a great character. But you got to remember your target audience, and the goal is to inspire these kids. You know, because my ultimate goal is I'd love for everybody to see and hear Shakespeare before they have to read it.
Sure.
It just wasn't intended to be read. I mean,
Agreed.
Even Shakespeare himself would probably cringe to see how many English, kids have to, read his plays and then write papers on them. They're like, why don't they produce them, right? So I'd been doing these kind of 30-minute shows for a while. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And I really loved what this 30-minute version show was doing for my students and the community. And last spring, that's when the pandemic hit. And we just had to like kind of adapt and just kind of go with it. And so we had been working on this Romeo and Juliet version live that we were going to take to schools. But then we just kind of threw it on Zoom like everybody else was. And it was okay. It was fine. It got us through the semester. But then I knew through the summer that I was probably going to have to do that again because I really wanted an audience. And I knew the only way we were going to get an audience this year was by doing it virtually. There's no way schools were going to let us come in or let Pima have schools come to us. Right. So we just adapted it. And so we had that first semester to kind of figure it out. And then this second semester to try to play with the strengths and weaknesses that you have in telling the story. But I kind of just taught my students that like, hey, this is a space. I love Peter Brook has a great quote in his book called The Empty Space, where he says, you give me any space and I'll give you a theater. And I feel like that's the same thing with Zoom. You give me Zoom, I can give you a show. And we just had to kind of figure out what we can and what we can't do in telling the story. And then that's how we do it.
Now, how did you wrap your head around tailoring it toward a younger crowd? Because as you pointed out, I mean, and in my experience too, kids hate themselves some Shakespeare, even if they've never experienced Shakespeare. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, about it not meaning to be read. I think most people's first experience with Shakespeare is maybe either Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet, and they have to read it in high school, and it's not a novel, although they have novelized both Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet at this point. I haven't read it, but so we start off by reading it as opposed to hearing it and seeing it and experiencing it. So I'm just wondering, how did you tailor it for a younger crowd so it was accessible and more easily understood, especially in such an abbreviated version?
Yeah. Well, actually, the Zoom kind of helped a little bit with that because, like, normally we would like really kiss in a scene, and like kids, we would go like, "Ew, gross!" Right. Like they would, and so be able to just like show a sign just to say, "Oh, they kissed," and they just kind of read it, and they're like, "Oh, okay." So that helped a little bit. And I have to admit, I have 3 kids of my own, one in high school, just a freshman. One in middle school and one in elementary school. And they're usually my guinea pigs of understanding things. So I would kind of go scene by scene and say, hey, let's read this, kind of act it out. do you understand what's going on? And, you know, all the version that we did it's like 99.9% Shakespeare's text. We just kind of cut out what we didn't want. We added a few minor things to kind of the Zoom version, but not much. So yeah,
lightsabers, pop
lightsabers.
songs.
Yeah. That kind of, yeah, that was in the original text. Shakespeare invented lightsabers. Yeah, you didn't know that? You didn't know that?
Well, I'm probably teaching William Shakespeare's Star Wars next year, so I'll have to.
Oh, I've got those series, and let me tell you, I've asked many times to see if we could produce that, but
that'd be amazing.
Right now, which is unfortunate.
Now, how successful do you feel this this venture was? Obviously, it's different than it would be normally when performing in front of an audience. You know, the thing that I was thinking about the most, because you have the settings adjusted at the beginning of the performance in such a way that all of the students are hidden. So the only people that the actors can see are each other. And you don't have that immediacy. You don't have that feedback. You don't have the energy to play off from an audience. And so you're kind of performing in a vacuum, yes, to a degree. And I'm just wondering how challenging that was, what your actors thought of it, what you thought of it, how successful overall you feel like the endeavor was, given all of the restrictions.
Yeah, that was the hardest, where you couldn't see it, you know. And what's great about Shakespeare is he does have these great soliloquies where you can talk directly to the audience. And right before the pandemic, I was really teaching my students, you know, because I normally teach that there's two focus points. You can have an action when you talk to someone like we are talking to each other, or I can have a thought and kind of remember something in the past or the future. But in Shakespeare's text, you can also have that focus point and just talk directly to the audience. And of course, we can't do that on Zoom. And it was interesting. I was curious about that for my students too. Although it was interesting, like, I don't know, half hour, 20 minutes before we did it for you, we did a dry run by ourselves, just with us. And then, but it's psychological. As soon as you know that other people are actually watching, the students did say it felt like a performance, even though it was exactly the way that we had performed it. We never see the students. I think one thing that we've learned that really helps is we want the actors to see all the kids before we perform. Yeah. So they, hey, put all your cameras. And like your class was huge. I think it was a couple classes, right?
Well, yeah, we've combined some classes because of the state testing. So we got bigger classes.
So we keep seeing these cameras come on, and we're like, holy cow, there's a lot of kids. Okay, you're our biggest audience, you know? Yeah. And so they said that it still felt like they had that energy of like a regular performance, and they got a little nervous and they were excited. And because I think it's still that psychological that like they do know that people are watching them, even though they can't see them.
Yeah, and it's not being recorded. I mean, you know, you don't have the ability to edit later on. You know, you have to keep going the same way you would on stage. How did you rehearse this? Were you all separate? Were you all doing it via Zoom? Did you ever get together at any point in person, or was it all just done 100% virtually?
Yeah, it was all done 100% virtually. I decided earlier for Pima, I could have made the class more of a hybrid. But I realized early on that I was like, hey, look, if our final project is virtual, let's just be virtual 100%. So we know how to deal with it. Because it didn't make sense to me to like figure out how to do it live in one space and switch it back over to the virtual settings. So everybody rehearsed separate by themselves, 100% Zoom, the entire rehearsal process.
Now, what kind of feedback have you gotten? We didn't have a whole lot of time at the end. We did that kind of little quiz show part. But have you spent any time with the students, kind of talking about it at all afterwards? Have you gotten any feedback from them? Any any indication whether or not it landed, or if they were just kind of sitting there with zombified expressions and mouths agape going, what did I just watch? You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've learned that like middle school and down, like if you just say, what do you think? They're like, oh, it's good. I like that. Right. But I think the best reactions is when people turn their cameras back on, kids are applauding, kids are smiling. You can tell kids had a good time. And that's really the goal, is just I don't really care so much if they remember the story or if they remember who was what or what happened. I just want them to remember the experience, to be like, hey, we saw this Romeo and Juliet thing over Zoom when we were in school. It was cool. I enjoyed it. And it seems like a lot of the kids and the teachers have really enjoyed it. And really the other goal was to kind of give back to the community, because it's been a hard year for us as teachers. And so to be like, hey, can I give you as actors, yeah, can I give you like an hour of you not have to worry about anything, and we'll entertain you and have a good time. And I think that's been the best gift for the teachers as well.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many of the reviews that I've read said this is the first time I've ever seen a play. And it's just so strange to think that for so many of these kids, the first time they've ever seen any kind of live performance is in this sort of virtual world, you know?
Right. Which is so foreign to us, right? We're like, no, it's so weird. Like, this should not be your first time, but glad that it is, and like go see it when we can do it normally.
Well, but what I found in my experience is that so many students just don't have any concept of the theater. You know, in the past, whenever I've mentioned that, you know, in my other life, I'm an actor, and their immediate response is what movies have you been in?
Movies,
like,
yeah.
Let me tell you about the second oldest profession, folks. There's a little thing called theater, and it's just so foreign to them. And so, you know, especially after a year of just being on Zoom, for them to show up and be met with this unexpected performance, I think that what I can discern is that most of them really were genuinely delighted by the experience, and a lot of them have said that now they want to see a live performance of something, which is, hey, you know, success as far as I'm concerned, you know, because even if they didn't get it all, and even if they came away shaking their heads, if they're even, you know, a modicum more interest in them, then I think, you know, mission is successful, you know. So yeah, well done on that. And what was I going to say? This is a part that I'll be editing out because I completely lost my train of thought. So one of the things that the students, they were two schools of thought. They were both confused by, or they were applauding, was the cross-gender casting, which is actually opposite from how it was done in Shakespeare's day. And I explained it to them that all of the women's roles were played by men in Shakespeare's day because the theater was no place for a proper woman to be seen. But here, I believe, did you have both Romeos played by women, or was it one? Remind me.
I think the first one was a woman and the second one was a man when we did it for the first time.
And what made you come to the decision to explore cross-gender casting with this show?
Yeah, it was kind of a homage to the past, saying that, hey, Shakespeare used to do it, and now we're kind of doing it but flipping it, letting the girls have an opportunity to play roles that they've never been able to play before. And typically I just kind of cast where I think the students are going to grow the best, and don't really look at gender, you know, because there was only 4 actors, and all 4 actors were playing male and female roles throughout the whole show. And just depending on the students that I have, I've done this one year where I have done an all male cast, and it's kind of more traditional. And then I've done an all female cast. Last year when we were doing this, the way we were working on a bilingual cast. So half of the one of the families spoke Spanish, and I had one of my students translate the English into Spanish, and then the other half spoke English. So I really just try to see where the students are and then let the students kind of dictate how we're going to actually do it as far as casting. So I don't really have like this like agenda where I'm gonna like women's power or equality, which I do believe in those things, but it's never for a statement. It's always rooted in what do I think the students need and which role do I think would be best for them where they are now, and then can this role take them to other places in their education.
Did you learn anything maybe surprising or make any discoveries due to the cross-gender casting that maybe you hadn't in a more traditional way of approaching it?
Not really. I mean, I get so invested in the work that sometimes it's hard for me to see what it looks like outside because I'm so inside the work. Again, doing it on Zoom makes it a little easier too, because then, like if two girls were across each other, if they were really acting in the same space, that would mean something even more. And maybe have to deal with that a little bit more and kind of discuss that. Right. But it's kind of safe behind Zoom because we know they're never going to physically do anything. Yeah. And so it's a little bit safer in that instance with Zoom. But in years past, I've done, all female cast and we have to, you do need to be careful of like who you send actors to, right? So, I don't know if I would have done an all-female cast and had two girls kiss in front of a, smaller audience, right? Because I don't know if they're, ready for that. And, it's
especially in middle school.
Yes, yes.
Then I think it just ended up being distracting. They're like,
right. Look at that, right? Yeah. So, but again, it's like we're always aware of what do the students need and what does the audience need. Right. And so we've got tons of versions. And so that's what's great is, I've got a class of 20 students and we really have like 4 or 5 versions of this show that we can produce and perform. And so we just see which audience needs what, right? You take an all-female cast to maybe a high school theater troupe and they'll think it's way cool. And then, so, it's really a win-win for both the students and the community to figure out which one needs which. And then we can give a lot to many different people.
Well, and I really think that speaks to the dedication and the work that you've put into this, that you're able to adapt it to those different audiences. And again, as you pointed out before, regardless of gender, if the talent is there, if the comprehension by the actors of the language is there to an extent that they can effectively convey it to an audience, then it's gonna land regardless of what the actual actors look like. And I think insofar as that goes, you were terribly successful.
Thank you.
So as you know, I just recently did this show where I was masked the whole time. We pre-recorded the dialogue. Yeah. And then we lip synced to our own voices in like this sort of weird Milli Vanilli theatrical universe. Right. And it was a very strange, very good experience. But I don't know that it's the kind of experience that once COVID is gone, hopefully when it's gone, there's going to be any reason to do it that way again. Right. And I'm just wondering if you think that with something like the Zoomification of Shakespeare here, if that's going to live on past COVID, or if this is just a momentary kind of thing to explore, if there's going to be any value to it to continue to portray it this way and perform it this way once the pandemic has calmed down and we're acting in more traditional ways.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even thinking practical, like I have to start planning for next year right now because, the college is always thinking way in advance. So we've got to set things. And so we're thinking of our next year's season and what we want to do. And we're like, okay, well, it seems like if we're on the path that we are, great, we'll be back in schools. But we were like, I'm not sure schools are ready to send busloads of kids to Pima still next year. Right? And so it's like, okay, well, we'll maybe be able to be in the same space, but maybe not with the audience. So I think the next step, and maybe the future of this, of a Zoom option, is to maybe try to figure out like a 3-camera shoot of us doing it live in our space that we send to your classroom, right? So we don't have to be sitting in little squares. We're like one square, but it's more normal for us because we have regular blocking. Maybe we're mic'd. Like I said, maybe we've got like a 3-camera shoot that somehow we mix into Zoom and show you, because I think that will stick around. Where what I've loved is our students performed to even classrooms in Wyoming. I reached out to a few friends in Wyoming, and the great thing about the virtual side is you can reach more people. So, but I would love to get back. I would love to get back to blocking it more traditionally and not just sitting in this little, you know, Brady Bunch square and like looking at, hey, right? But if that way, then we're doing it more the traditional blocking. We're kind of waiting for the schools to be ready for us to come in person, right? And so maybe that future will be for a few years. We may have to just, but I still like the live aspect, right? Because we would still want to do it live, and you know how we kind of proved we were doing it live was like kind of, you know, trying to do that student participation where, you know, where it's like, although the first one we failed, forgot to tell the student. But yeah, I think in the future, having it, but having the students be in the same space, then we can share with the audience. We might have to do that next year until we're able to come back live.
How did you experience any challenges or any real differences when it came to directing actors via Zoom than you would if you were there in person with them?
Yes. So it's the delays. You have to deal with the delay of the internet and their computer compression and speed. You would want to line, guys, this is a shared line. So like I have the first half of the meter, you have the second half. In the same space, I can teach them to go da 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 da. But here it's like da 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 da. Da, 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 da. It's like, no. You have to go right after they speak. They're like, we are. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the compression. Oh, right. But you know, at the same time, like there's some articles and things that I always have my students read. In Shakespeare's day, they would only have like a good week to rehearse, and then they perform. And they came up with a lot of their blocking. They didn't really have the traditional director at that time. And the playwright was kind of there to make sure things were happening the way that they should. And so a lot of it was me just making breakout rooms and saying, go play, go investigate of what you can and can't do with this text. We'll come back, we'll perform for each other and do that. So I think the biggest thing was just dealing with each student had different technology. And some had better equipment, some had worse, and it's not their fault. Just dealing with that extra element of technology, you don't have to worry about like someone's in the space, then all of a sudden they disappear because their internet went out, right? Like that's never been a thing in the real space, but now that's the world that we live in right now.
Yeah, and you know, and I applaud the effort again, because I mean, people could have just sat around all year and said, "Oh well, ho hum, poor us, can't do nothing." And yet, I think that you know, taking the initiative of figuring something new out, even if it doesn't work 100%, because we're dealing with a paradigm unlike anything that we've ever experienced before, especially in the theater. And so trying to adapt theater to this virtual world, I think it's a tremendous endeavor. And regardless of whether or not you're successful, and I think you were, I think that at least making that attempt to do something, to create something, to not just sit around and feel sorry for yourself because the world's under lockdown, but to continue to create and thrive and explore and grow, I think is just tremendous. And I think that's what artists do. You know, life will find a way. I mean, that's a Jurassic Park reference, so it doesn't really apply. But you know, our art will find a way. And if we have all sorts of restrictions, you know, maybe the restrictions allow us to see things in ways that we haven't before. When I was doing the show where I was masked and lip syncing to my own voice, I was suddenly much more aware of my own physicality than I normally am on stage. And so by having these kind of restrictions imposed upon us, sometimes we're able to not just phone it in and be on autopilot and rely on old tricks because everything is suddenly changed. And so I think it's a tremendous endeavor. And I'm really glad you were able to share the experience with us. My final question to you is, why should kids give a darn about Shakespeare anyway? I mean, aside from them not getting it because they have to read it and them hating it without knowing anything about it, why is it even relevant, and why do we even need to be teaching 400-year-old plays to modern day students? What's the point?
That's a great question, and I think what it is we have to show them that they are already using a lot of words that Shakespeare made up, and a lot of phrases that they already know, like knock knock, who's there? You know, that was for Shakespeare, and like row, like eyeball, and like all these were he was curious and he created, and right now I feel like it's kind of someone like says a word, you're like, that's not a word. It's like, well, but it could be. Right? Like, let's make it a word.
Time between the on fleeks and the bussin', and I'm just like shaking my head, feeling like a very old man. These darn kids and their words, what? It's like not totally awesome. I know that for sure, totally. But
I think that, and just it is hard, and it is a tough language to understand at first, but we can do hard things. And once we figure out how to tackle the language, it's kind of like a wave. Like, you know, when you're in the ocean and like you're trying to catch a wave, the wave doesn't care if you get caught by it or not, right? The wave's just going to keep going through. So the Shakespeare, it's good, and it's like the wave, and it's just going to go through. But if you keep trying to catch it, the moment you do, and then you're writing that text in that moment, it's the best feeling once you've tackled it, understand it, harnessed that work. And so Shakespeare is hard, but I have seen elementary school kids in Shakespeare competitions do amazing job of understanding it and connecting. And so I think what I love about teaching Shakespeare is it teaches us that there are things bigger than our individual self. And once we figure out how to tackle that and do that, you can see that that's, you know, being part of something that's bigger than yourself, I think has always been the best experiences I've had as an actor, as a athlete, as a parent, all of those things. And I think that's what it's really about.
And I think part of what you're saying too is it, you know, I think, you know, I did this experiment where I did this hip hop versus Shakespeare just to show the students that the words and the language are not as far removed from them as they may think. In fact, Shakespeare was writing to a largely illiterate audience. And so to show them, when you're saying part of a bigger thing, to show them that 400-year-old history is not as difficult to comprehend as they might assume, simply because it's something unusual. It does take work, but I think that sense of accomplishment that they feel once they get going with it, I think that ocean wave is a perfect analogy, that once they catch on and once they begin understanding, I think it gives them a sense of accomplishment that they wouldn't have if they were just studying, you know, a modern day text. So I really appreciate that insight. Chris, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate what you're doing, and hopefully this time next year we'll be back in person and you and I can work on a show together finally, right?
Absolutely. Let's do that.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. And once again, thanks so much for visiting with my class, and thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.